A lot has been happening lately in the pro-life movement, and now is a great time for you to get involved. Tonight, we'll find out more about an organization that's been working to defend life in America from even before Roe versus Wade. So please stay with us. Thank you very much. Welcome to EWTN Live. I'm Father Mitch. This is our chance to bring you guests from all over the world. And before we get to introduce our guest, I just want to mention that today I've changed some of my life goals. I'm 37 years ordained today. So my new goal is to get to 38 years. So that's one of the things we're going to try to get to. Now tonight, our guest is the president of the nation's oldest and largest pro-life group with affiliates in all 50 states and over 3,000 local chapters nationwide. So please welcome the president of National Right to Life, Carol Tobias. Carol, welcome. Welcome. When did Right to Life get started?
It actually started in 1968.
68. Why did things get going then?
Some of the state legislatures were starting to look at the abortion laws in their state. Some of them had made some changes, not many of them, but some had. But there were enough
California, New York.
Yes. There were enough people nationwide concerned about what could happen that they, pulled together pro-life leaders from around the country and said we need to start doing something on a national scale to fight this. So in 1968, the leaders came together. We had our first newsletter, and 2 years later, our first convention.
I can recall some of the state referenda. I was in Michigan when they voted on abortion, and of course, they voted it down.
I was in North Dakota, and they voted it down by 78%. That they said they do not want abortion in their state.
Right.
And it was just 2 months later that the Supreme Court ignored everything that had been done, overturned the laws in all 50 states, and created their own law.
Yep. Well, and it's something that's very interesting when you see some of the things the justices said later. That at least one justice admitted that his motive was fear of overpopulation. And the problem is that's not a basis for a court to legislate, to change everybody's laws. But they did anyway.
Justice Blackmun had worked as, I believe, general counsel for Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, and his concern was all doctor-oriented, that it doesn't, the doctors are the only ones that should be making this decision. So there were a lot of different reasons that went into it, but what we got was abortion for all 9 months for any reason.
With a decision about that made by a bunch of lawyers.
Right.
I don't think anybody on the Supreme Court was a doctor.
It's usually lawyers on the court, yes.
And same thing going on with the health care, law. I mean, it's not generally doctors legislating, that's all, mostly lawyers. So
I've heard from so many doctors that say they don't want to work under Obamacare, that they're just going to retire.
Yep,
if they can, if they're
Yeah.
old enough, if they are well off enough to get through it, they're just going to retire. They're not going to put up with it. It's too much of a headache.
Because again, it's lawyers making medical decisions.
Right.
So as a result of that Supreme Court decision, now 55 million plus children have been killed in the wombs. making the womb the most dangerous place in America.
Yes.
You know, that's tragically.
It is. And it's 55 million children that are not here. Many of them would be having their own families now, creating to our economic problems, I mean, helping our economic problems, because they would be contributing to Social Security and Medicare and all the other, you know, taxes. We're missing that part of the workforce that actually would be helping some of the economic problems that we have now. We also have families that are really hurting. Women who had an abortion not knowing what they were doing, and now are realizing, you know, my son or daughter would be 6 and, you know, he would be playing out in the playground. I will never see my daughter walk down the aisle to get married. These kinds of trauma cases are following women all over the country. We have a lot of hurting people in this country.
I come across them.
Fathers, grandparents.
Some of them are, exactly. It's not only the women. I think they feel the pain very acutely, but also it's on a lower simmer, but still present among many fathers of children who've been aborted.
Oh, yes.
Now, when did you become president of Right to Life?
I became president in 2011.
Okay, so you've been around for 2
years now.
years
over 2 years, yeah.
But you've been involved prior to that.
Yes, I was the executive director of North Dakota Right to Life, which is National Right to Life has an affiliate in each of the 50 states. So North Dakota Right to Life was our group there. I was the executive director there. Then I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1991 and became the political director for National Right to Life. And I loved it because I love politics and helping candidates, and that was a great niche for me. But then that's also where I met a man who became my husband, and he wanted to move back to his home of New Mexico. So that's actually where I live, and I just do a lot of traveling back to the office in Washington.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now, what are some of the trends and new things going on with Right to Life at this point? I mean, there's been a whole slew of things, you know, coming up. What are the elements that you as the president and other folks in Right to Life are dealing with?
What I find very encouraging is that many of our state affiliates have been effective in passing laws in their states. We had 9 states that passed a ban on abortion after the unborn child can feel pain, which is about 20 weeks gestation. And just today, the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee decided that they were going to send this bill to the House floor. They adopted a bill on a vote of 20 to 12 to ban abortion nationwide once the unborn child can feel pain, which is about 20 weeks. And we expect to vote on the House floor next week. So we see that as a great step forward.
You know, a lot of people still don't understand enough for all the knowledge we have today about human gestation that they did not have in 73. They made a lot of their Supreme Court decision based on ignorance, just because science didn't know. But now we know a lot more. And you know, the human brain and the human heart are, when do they start?
The heart begins to beat about 18 days. 18
days. Okay.
And
and at that point, very few women would know for sure that they're carrying a child.
Right.
So it would be very rare that a woman would know that quickly she was pregnant, and the child's heart is already beating.
Yes, yes.
And the brain?
And the brain, I believe about 42 days.
Okay.
It's very early in the pregnancy. We know that the baby can feel pain by 16 to 20 weeks. The pain receptors are there. By 20 weeks, definitely, the nerves are telling the brain, you know, sending the signals to the brain that there is pain there.
Pain and or pleasure. You know, presumably.
Presumably, yeah. I mean, you can measure pain because when you stick someone with a needle or if a scalpel gets to the unborn child, he's going to recoil and thrash around. You know, so you can measure that.
Yes.
You know, that doctors will know that if they're going to do surgery on that unborn child, they need to anesthetize the child, because the pain is visible.
You see, and that's one of the other things. Today, there are a number of surgical procedures that take place when the child is still inside the mother's womb. There's that famous picture of a doctor opening up a mother's womb and the baby grabbing his finger.
Yes.
That's a very powerful, and even I believe it was Fox News would not allow that to be shown. One of their reporters, when I showed them, they wouldn't let it. That was too controversial. But it's, this is something that is indicative. This is not a blob of tissue.
Right, absolutely. We have a fully formed human being, and that's why we want to stop abortion. We want to stop all abortions. But if we can say that once the unborn child can feel pain at about 20 weeks, abortion would not be allowed, that is a step forward. And we really think that we've got enough votes on the Supreme Court that would uphold that law. And that's just one chink in the armor of Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that Roe is going to come down with a complete frontal assault. But if you can take it out piece by piece, it will eventually fall. Mm-hmm. And we are encouraged because we think this could be one way to get that armor to start falling.
Well, see, this is, so I've given a number of talks around the country on what to me is a very important theme of at least 3 decisions when the Supreme Court denied human dignity. One was the Dred Scott decision, saying that blacks can never be equal to whites. Right. And that was in the defense of the decision. And then Plessy versus Ferguson, saying you have separate but equal, but you can't separate on the basis of race. Instead of just say, no, if you're an American, you're an American. Right. And both of those decisions caused tremendous violence. The Civil War, and then the Jim Crow laws, and the lynchings and such. And then we see Roe versus Wade also denying the humanity of a child and causing even more devastation. But they were undone, and so can this be undone. I think that's why I want to bring that up, that they undid Dred Scott and Plessy versus Ferguson. And as you say, it was piece by piece, that the NAACP worked against Plessy. So we have to do the same with Roe.
Yeah. And I think it's going to take a lot of education. Another piece of legislation that is working its way through many of the state legislatures would ban webcam abortions.
What is that?
And that right now, the number of doctors willing to do abortions is dropping. Mm-hmm. Because it's just, after 40 years, it's still not culturally acceptable, really. I mean, people don't talk about it at their dinner table. What are you going to do tonight, Susie? Tomorrow? Well, I'm going to go get an abortion. You don't say, I'm not going to be up here, be at work tomorrow because I'm going to go get an abortion. Mm-hmm. It's still not talked about like an appendix, a gallbladder surgery, whatever it might be. Right. So there are not that many doctors willing to step up and fill the shoes of the abortionists that are retiring or dying. So what Planned Parenthood and some other facilities want to do is set up an abortionist, someone supposedly a doctor, in one room, and he will talk to women in another city or even in another state, and talk to her about the abortion procedure. And if he decides, okay, you're ready for this, all he has to do is push a button on his computer, and a drawer in the room where she is seated will open, and inside that drawer will be the 2-drug cocktail that will kill her unborn child and expel the baby from the womb. So it would take 1 or 2 abortionists sitting in an office somewhere to prescribe the chemical cocktail for abortion drug RU486 to women all over the country. Mm-hmm. So state legislatures have started responding by saying the abortionist at least has to be in the same room. with the woman. RU-486 is a very dangerous drug. 14 women who used that drug have died in the United States since 2000. Thousands of women have had complications. There's severe bleeding. Parts of the body, the baby may stay inside the uterus.
And of course, cause infection.
Of course, it's very dangerous for the women. And we've got now a way to say, that's one way, another way we can stop abortion is to say that you can't just, sit in Alabama and kill babies in Arkansas.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, a doctor in one state doesn't have a license to practice medicine in every state. No. I don't think that that's quite legal. It doesn't sound, I mean, again, I don't know the law.
Unfortunately, it's being done.
Yeah. That sounds like it's going beyond. I mean, I don't know that they would do that with a lot of other things. Again, there might be, I'm sure they have some ways around the law there. So.
And I'm sure there are some cases where in rural communities, maybe this is the only way that they can talk to a doctor. It may get to that at some point if enough doctors retire because of Obamacare. But right now we are seeing abortions prescribed Skype, via Skype.
Wow.
Skyping.
Now, we've also gone through this horrible case of Kermit Gosnell. It's very sad, and he's taking this and saying, well, this is what I'll put up with. He doesn't seem to have a sense that what he's done is incorrect, but he was doing some procedures because he had cut so many women and cut up their wombs and had been sued. Kermit Gosnell then would take the baby out and kill it outside the womb. And that's what he was in prison for. Do you have any comments on that case?
Well, the grand jury in Philadelphia said that the main problem was that the health department was not monitoring the facilities. They hadn't been in there in something like 17 years. Mm-hmm. The place was horrid. Cat feces on the stairs, a cat with lice walking around, women in the recovery room being covered with blankets that had blood on them from other patients, instruments not being cleaned between patients. I mean, it was a horrible condition. The health department didn't look at it.
Those are the medical standards of 1600.
The National Abortion Federation, Gosnell asked the National Abortion Federation if he could become a member, and they came in and supposedly inspected the clinic and said, no, he's not up to our standards. So they rejected him, but they didn't tell anybody. Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania was referring some patients to him, and then after a while they said they weren't going to do that because they didn't think his standards were that great. It wasn't a clean clinic, but again, they didn't tell anybody. So women were being harmed, and yes, the babies were being killed. All abortion is inhumane, but these were babies after they had been delivered. He would slit the back of their neck and slice the spinal cord. But what he was actually arrested on before they found out all this was that they thought he was maybe dealing drugs or using prescription drugs in a way that he wasn't supposed to. So that's what actually started the entire investigation.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think that this is just a rogue case? No. We've
had employees from abortion facilities in Delaware come forward, in Texas, Maryland, which actually has no laws on abortion, no limits whatsoever, has actually shut down an abortion facility for sanitary reasons, and it happens a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard of that going on elsewhere, and that because of sanitation and women becoming very sick, and this has been sort of one of the battle cries of the pro-abortion movement, which is to keep abortion safe for the women anyway. But that hasn't turned out the way they say.
No, abortion isn't safe. And even if it were, if the abortion facility was so clean that you could eat off the floor, then I would still want it shut down. Abortion should be stopped, and it harms women just because the place is unsanitary, or whether it's sanitary or unsanitary. We still need to shut them down because abortion is wrong.
Yeah. Now, at this stage, where we've seen certainly some parts of the abortion industry devolving into this, barbaric behavior, filthy facilities and things like that. But not all of them are on that same level by any means. What is the trend going on now in terms of educating the general population about how to deal with this very bad procedure, this morally bad procedure? What does Right to Life want the general population to start doing?
We need to educate ourselves and our family members, our fellow church members, our neighbors, our co-workers. There are too many people in this country that don't realize abortion is legal for all 9 months. Mm-hmm. Too many people don't know that Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion provider, doing more than 330,000 abortions each year, is getting more than $500 million in tax dollars, taxpayer money, in state, federal, local grants and contracts. They're getting our tax dollars, and they are killing babies. But in a recent poll, was it 61% of the people said that they didn't know Planned Parenthood did abortions. 50% of people who said they were pro-life didn't know that Planned Parenthood was doing abortions. So there's a lot that we need to just learn ourselves to be able to talk about it and to convince women not to get an abortion, but just to kind of get an overall, increase the perception and make it a reality in this country that our people just don't want abortion legal. We don't want to kill unborn babies in this country.
And one of the things that we have to keep in mind is, a lot of people who would be regular church-going, Catholic, Protestant, and then of course people in the synagogues as well, they might be regular members who are practicing their faith, but if that person or a daughter gets pregnant, they get into a panic mode and they take the abortion option and say, well, I know this is against our teaching, but my daughter's life will be messed up.
Or I don't want my priest or pastor to know that my teenage daughter is sexually active, and made this mistake. I would be embarrassed for people to see my daughter coming to church pregnant. So yeah, there's a lot of different reasons, but yes, a lot of women who get abortions would identify themselves as Catholic or Protestant.
Sure. I mean, a large
it's not just atheists killing their children.
No, by no means.
Yeah.
No, in general, atheists don't get pregnant. I mean, they're sort of like mules. They don't reproduce. All they can do is they're sort of parasites. They take the children that believers produce and they try to turn them into atheists, but they generally don't have many children of their own. Like I said, they're mules. Okay. But the thing that we want to do is address these other folks. For instance, I've been hearing confessions for these last 37 years. I started hearing confessions on Skid Row in Chicago. The surprises are gone. I don't come up with much new anymore. And, the love of Christ is what we want to communicate. in the confessional, and the acceptance and cherishing of life is what we want to communicate in the church community for the young woman and for the baby she's carrying and gives birth to. And of course, if she's not old enough to raise a child, there are plenty of people in the church who would help her to move toward adoption. I know so many folks who would love to adopt, and they just don't have a baby. They'd love to adopt a baby.
Right.
So this is something that we also need to communicate to practicing Christians, that need to come forward and not be afraid of the church.
Absolutely.
And not be afraid of somebody clicking their teeth. That's not, we don't want to make funny noises because somebody, got pregnant out of wedlock. We want to help them.
Right, right.
What else can they do?
I would encourage people to pray about what talents they have and where they can be used. There is so much that can be done in the pro-life movement. National Right to Life works more in the legislative arena, both national and state level. We get involved in elections, campaigns. We want to elect the pro-life candidates who will pass these bills. We want to do the educational aspect because we realize that people aren't going to, communicate to their neighbors or vote for a candidate if they don't understand abortion or know how bad it is or think of that unborn child, when they're voting. So that's kind of our focus. But there are pregnancy resource centers that will help the women who are considering an abortion, and hopefully the resource center will be able to convince her to carry the pregnancy to term and then either raise that child or release him or her for adoption.
And
but
also
there's
a lot of those pregnancies, and this is a very important thing because sometimes you say, oh yeah, you tell them not to have the abortion, but how are they supposed to go through prenatal care?
Oh, the pregnancy centers will have an arrangement with medical personnel, doctors, nurses, to help the woman with what she needs during that pregnancy. They can provide baby clothes, maternity clothes, a place to stay if she needs a place to stay.
Exactly.
Some of them have developed programs to even help her with, to continue her education or to do some kind of career job training. I don't know that many of them get into that, but I know some do.
That's right.
So they're trying to make it easier for this woman to take care of her child if she does decide to raise the child. But there are so many things in the pro-life movement that need to be done, whether it's lobbying legislators, writing letters to the editor, if they're fortunate enough to have a few extra dollars, all pro-life groups are, working on donations. Sure. It's certainly not tax funded like Planned Parenthood. But there's so much. So I would encourage people to just pray, figure out what their talents are and how they can use them, because the pro-life movement needs so many more people volunteering and getting involved and making a difference in their community.
Yeah. Just gave me an idea. Maybe we should lobby our legislators that for every dollar you give to Planned Parenthood to educate about abortion and then help do abortions, you should give the same amount of dollars to groups that educate about pro-life. That might sort of cut things down. We got to take a break. We're going to come back in a couple minutes. I want to get questions from our studio audience and from you. So please stay with us. Thank you very much and welcome back. I want to give you a little bit of information about National Right to Life. You can go to their website by going to www.nrlc.org. nrlc.org. Or you can also call them at 202-626-8800. And one of the things I want to inform you about is that in just a couple of weeks or so, you're going to be having the National Right to Life Convention. Where?
It will be in Dallas at the Hyatt Regency, which is connected to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport.
So that's one right in the middle of the airport.
Yes.
Right.
So if someone wants to fly into Dallas-Fort Worth, they're there. The convention is going to be right there. We have, I think, a fantastic lineup of speakers. Carter Sneed, who is a professor of law at the University of Notre Dame, is also the director of their Center for Ethics and Culture, is going to be speaking. We've got Wesley Smith, who is a fantastic author on assisted suicide and euthanasia around the world, what's happening there. Chet McDaniel was born with no arms and very short legs, and he's going to talk about how he isn't perfect, but he's worth it. He's a great guy. Reggie Littlejohn is the president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, and she's going to talk about China, forced abortion, sex selection abortions in Asia. I mean, we have
which are very, very high, and means a high preponderance of boys over girls because boys take care of their parents.
The best estimates are that there are 200 million girls in this country that are basically missing. They've been killed through abortion or after birth.
In which country?
Most of it is in in Asia, China, India.
In India.
But it's becoming more prevalent in the United States, in Canada, and usually it's girls that are killed because the parents want a boy.
I don't think people appreciate how dangerous that is, because in a country of over 1 billion people, if I think it's something like 85 girls for every 100 boys. What will that mean down the line when you have 100 or 200 million young men for whom there are no women to marry? What do you do with them?
Well, unfortunately, what we're seeing is that women from other countries are being kidnapped, sold by their parents, forced to work in brothels as prostitutes.
Right. And also in terms of geopolitics, this does not exactly. That's what you do with extra men.
You have war.
In China, march across the border and take over Siberia. This is very risky.
Yes.
All right. Again, we also want to invite you to be part of our studio audience. If you can be part of us, contact our pilgrimage department by going to our website, www.ewtn.com, or call them at 205-271-2966, and be here like all these nice people that we have here from Indiana and Kentucky and other places. Ready for some questions?
Yes.
Let's start off with John. Hello, John.
Hello, Father Mitch.
How are you?
Good today. And you?
I'm well. And what's your question today?
Well, a comment, like a mini story and a question. I praise the Lord Almighty that we have people working in large organizations like National Right to Life. Now, believe me, I'm a sinner. I am not bragging on myself. The Lord did this. I helped save a baby in Cleveland, Ohio. Young gal doing stripping, the could-be husband, he was gone. He didn't want a part of it. I helped save a baby in Columbus, and they were going to get married. They were young, very young. And when I was talking to him, I had an inkling, and I said, the guy's name was Matt, and I said, Matt, have you ever been baptized in water? And he said, I don't think so. I said, how are you raised? He said, Baptist. And I said, you know, it's very important to get baptized in water. And I later heard he was baptized and they did get married, and then I lost touch of them. So my question would be, for national right to life, it's not just the women's body like the lie goes. A man is involved. And what can you say to men, and what do you do to men who either are facing this or have gone through it? And I'll hang up. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of men who would love to save their baby, but the law in this country says it's the woman's decision. So we know that there are men who are hurting because their son or daughter is dead.
Mm-hmm. And they have, legally, they have no say.
No, they have no right whatsoever.
Nope. And this is one of the things that a lot of young men need to realize. The laws right now about, birth and everything else, and responsibility are very strongly stacked against such young men, and so that to be very alert to that. This is Absolutely. Not a playground. This is a land minefield if you're not careful. Young lady, where are you from?
Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Good to have you here. And what is your question?
My question is, what is the main reason why women say they have abortions?
There are a lot of reasons. They say that they're too young. They've had a couple children and don't want any more. Having the child is going to interfere with their education or their career. One main thread, though, that does come through in a large percentage of the abortions is that the woman says that their partner, whether it's their husband, their boyfriend, is the one pushing them to get the abortion. Yes. There are men who would love to have that child and they want to save their child and they can't. But that's not, unfortunately, that's not the norm. Usually it's the woman saying, I've been abandoned, I've been threatened that if I don't get the abortion, he's going to leave me.
Or he'll harm me. And that also takes place. Some men threaten to harm a woman, if not kill her, if she doesn't have an abortion. So it's out of fear.
Supposedly it's her choice, but she's being pressured into it. Many women who don't really want the abortion will go through with it because they think that will save the relationship.
And do statistics back that up?
No.
No, of course not. Of course not. If a man is saying, it's me or kill a baby, he is not serious about you.
Oh, not at all.
So this, that's a baloney argument that come from a man. We have another call. Hello, Joe?
Yes.
Hi, where are you from?
Nebraska.
Great. And what's your question?
I want to know why we in pro-life are so guarded and so careful not to show the true viciousness and brutality of an abortion.
Do you want to respond to that?
It's a mixed bag because people need to know we're talking about a baby, a human being whose arms and legs are being ripped apart. But if you show the pictures, many people are just going to say, I don't want anything to do with that, and turn and walk the other way. Yep. So I can understand wanting to show the reality.
Yeah, they go into a certain shock and they shut down.
But they won't listen to anything after that because they're turned off.
Right.
It's sad. I understand showing the pictures because when I was very young, I saw a picture of an aborted baby next to the picture of a developing baby, and it made an impact. But to too many people, they don't want to hear anymore. Once they see that, they want nothing to do with it, and it actually can harm the effort to try to educate them or to convince them that we're talking about a human being that should be protected. They don't want to hear.
Now, one of the things, Joe, and I would say I've never been pro-abortion, but, y'all, National Right to Life helped produce the silent scream, as I recall, with Dr. Nathanson. And it was an ultrasound of an abortion that was part of that movie. And what, you know, something that you mentioned earlier in the show tonight that just moved, that image has never left my mind. It wasn't bloody because it was an ultrasound. But when you see the baby punching and kicking against the doctor's knife, it's trying to protect himself from being cut into pieces. And then it showed how they cut off the arms and legs. And again, it's not bloody, but it is very, very powerful when you see it's a normal human being defending itself against a force far superior and just using just brute might against that little baby.
I remember when that film came out, we actually did a press conference. I was up in North Dakota at the time, and I was surprised at how many reporters came because we were going to talk about this film that showed an abortion. But when I asked the reporters to watch the film, they all got up and left. You know, the reporters just aren't interested in seeing or hearing the truth. And unfortunately, that's, you know, that was many years ago. And unfortunately, we still have too many that aren't interested in carrying the truth.
Right. Right. You see, and I think that's Joe's point. You know, the reporters won't look at it. Right. And 85% of reporters are pro-choice, pro-abortion. And, you know, they call themselves pro-choice, but they're pro-abortion. Sure. And, you know, what can we do to get people to see that reality? I think that's part of his concern.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons we want to talk about the unborn child feeling pain, because that does talk about the humanity of the child. You know, no one likes to be poked with a needle or stub their toe. You know, it hurts. So when you think about the unborn child inside the mother's womb feeling pain, you know, we want to make this more than a blob of tissue, that we're talking about a person. You know, so we're trying to find ways to do that without showing the actual bloody pictures.
Right. I have a question from our studio audience. Sir, where are you from?
Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Good to have you here. And what is your question?
I was wondering what we're doing to educate the youth on abortion in America.
All right.
Okay, great.
Do you have a youth section?
We do. We do. National Teens for Life has been in existence for almost 30 years. And there will be a National Teens for Life convention in conjunction with the adult convention in Dallas in 2 weeks. Many of our state groups are doing camps now for different age groups, middle school, junior high, high school, college, camps to learn the issues and what to do about them. So we do understand that this battle is going to go on for a long time, and we need the young people working not just as future leaders, but leaders today.
Now, are you in a Catholic school or a public school?
Public school.
In your school, do they teach you what goes on in an abortion?
I've actually had to teach a lot of my friends. We talk about it at lunch sometimes if it comes up, and they really have no idea what's going on, and they can't go to these conferences.
Do they teach anything about abortion in your school?
Not that I can remember.
Okay, so this is, and that's why I wanted you to stay there, because it's not part of a curriculum. It probably would be seen as too political or religious, you know, and so they won't talk about it in the government-run schools.
But that is something we're working on. We actually have an intern with us this summer who is a teacher, and we have asked her to work on projects, activities for young people, but also possibly turning it into school curriculums. And if the information is based on science and medical textbooks, biology, teachers could teach the development of the unborn child and provide a lot of good information without being accused of presenting a pro-life position and not being balanced or fair in presenting both sides. So we are actually working on things that we can get hopefully into schools.
Well, for instance, there's that wonderful, wonderful program that National Geographic did, with cameras inside a womb showing the development of a child. It's just so beautifully shot. And you say, wow, that's so cool to see it. Just seeing that would be something that is good science.
Yes.
And let the science speak for itself. And that would be one of the things. I have another caller on the line. Hello, Marianne.
Hi, Father Pacwa. How are you?
Fine. Where are you from?
I'm from New York.
Great.
I was just hoping that you and Carol could give me a little bit of advice. I am pro-life, but unfortunately within my circle of friends and acquaintances, I'm the minority. And the one thing I've always been struck by, so many people, whether women friends of mine who've had their own children or nieces and nephews that are having children, everyone is so excited. It's a baby, it's a baby. But when it comes to somebody else who wants an abortion, it's a blob or it's a fetus, and it's really not. It's just a clump of cells. And I was hoping that you might be able to give me some advice about what kind of advice or an argument, and I use argument in the broadest sense of the word, respectful but powerful, to show them the error of their ways, that a baby is a baby is a baby. Was your baby, my baby, whoever's baby? And thank you so much. I guess it's just so hypocritical how when it's mine, it's my baby. When it's somebody else, it's a group of cells. And I thank you so much for all the work that you do, and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. Okay. What do you suggest she do to help communicate that sense of this being really a baby?
I would keep talking about baby, baby, baby. Keep that word coming up in the conversation. There are some really good brochures that would have pictures of the developing baby at the smallest, 6 weeks, maybe when she's pretty sure she's pregnant. Having something available. A lot of pro-lifers I know actually keep things in their purses, in their pockets, in their cars, with pictures of the baby. Because when
not the pictures of bloody things.
No, the beautiful developing baby.
Right.
Showing the arms and the the hand kind of starting to take shape, and just the beautiful pictures of the baby. I would encourage everyone to keep something like that handy. And when you start talking to people about abortion and the baby versus the fetus, put a picture in front of them and say, do you really think this isn't a baby? What is it?
I recall, Marianne, when I lived in the Bronx, I was studying at Fordham, doing some philosophy courses. I went to the Natural History Museum in Manhattan, and there was an exhibit of small babies. I don't know if they'd been miscarried or what, because this was done, before Roe versus Wade was passed. I assume that these had died naturally and they weren't aborted, but they were entire babies encased in plastic, and you could see, these children through the different stages of development. And it was a very powerful exhibit, to see. And I remember just going, wow, because we didn't have the photographs then and all. Right. So, maybe to get back over to the city, find out if that exhibit is still permitted by the politicians in New York, and see if it's there, and bring some of your friends there and see this is the real development, and it shows from the very small stages all the way up.
A lot of our state affiliates and chapters do booths at their county fairs or their state fairs, and they have models of the developing baby. And it's remarkable, because a 30-year-old might come up and think, oh, this isn't a human being and
Right.
non-person. You know, President Obama doesn't admit that any baby pre-viable is even a person.
No.
You know, so they
He wouldn't
they
vote
have,
if
they
a
have
one
put up these.
survived an abortion. He wouldn't vote to save its life.
Right, right.
In Illinois.
So they have put up these blinders, and yet a 3-year-old will come up to these models and say, "Baby, baby." You know, so the little kids know what this is.
Right.
It's kind of amazing that as we get older, we get dumber sometimes.
Well, down here in Alabama, we say you get educated beyond your intelligence.
Yes.
We have another question here from a lady in our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
From Brisbane in Australia, Father.
Good to have you here. Good on you. And what is your question?
I was just wondering if the Right to Life movement here in America has the same strength in like South America or around the world, or do you have the same problems throughout the world, or is it just basically mainly here that you're dealing with?
The problem is the United Nations. Through the UN, a lot of pressure is put on countries that are culturally pro-life.
Mm-hmm.
South America, Africa, Central America.
Caribbean.
You know, very pro-life, and yet they are being told, you know, look, if you want any help, any UN aid, change your laws on abortion.
Yes.
You know, any conference, if it is on safety, housing, food, any kind of development, even on, you know, immigration as people move around the world, somehow abortion gets brought into every conference as if that is the solution to every problem.
If you just reduce your population size by killing the children in the womb, then you won't have these problems.
Yes. National Right to Life does have a representative that works at the United Nations. We are a non-governmental organization, so she is there all the time. She goes to many of the conferences and has been very successful. She works very closely with the Holy Father, the Vatican's representative at the UN, you know, bringing together Catholics, Muslims, a lot of different groups to fight, you know, these proposals at various UN conferences.
Matter of fact, you know, the Vatican and many Muslim nations have been strong allies on, you know, to be anti-abortion and pro-family.
Yes, so we have been able to work within the UN structure to try to prevent some of the pro-abortion laws that they would like to force on other countries.
But it's not only the United Nations, something that we as U.S. citizens need to be very alert to is that the federal government ties pro-abortion and pro-contraception terms to foreign aid to many countries. When President Obama took office, he signed a series of executive orders to make those links. If you want foreign aid from the United States, you have to be willing to do women's health education, which was in effect pro-abortion legislation or education, oftentimes provided by your friend and mine, Planned Parenthood.
Well, hundreds of millions of our tax dollars are going to organizations like International Planned Parenthood that go into other countries and lobby against their pro-life laws.
Because Planned Parenthood says all the money we get from the federal government is for education. That's their standard line. None of it goes for abortion because that is against the law. But they're using it to push abortion throughout the third world because as Planned Parenthood was founded by Margaret Sanger to reduce the number of people of color and other undesirable people by their standards, inferior people, they are still doing that in the third world, and we help finance it.
There are limits on the money that Planned Parenthood gets here in the United States.
Right.
They can't use that money directly to pay for abortions. That limit does not apply on international level. They can use that money to perform abortions.
One of the limits we have is that we've run out of time. I want to thank you and all of you. May God bless you and strengthen you to work for life, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And again, I want to remind you, this network is brought to you by you. We can bring you this information and talk about these important issues because you make it possible. So please keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill so we can pay our bills, especially in these summer months. Thank you.